In the dimly lit depths of the Thal'kor homeworld, beneath layers of stone and crystal, lay the Chamber of Whispers. It was a place older than memory, where the air hummed with ancient secrets, and the walls bore the etched histories of fallen empires. Here, surrounded by the cold glow of bioluminescent fungi, the Thal'kor Council of Elders convened to discuss the growing whispers of a planet on the outer edge of the galaxy Earth. At the center of the chamber sat Supreme Elder Vextar, his form draped in robes woven from the silk of nocturnal creatures. His many eyes, each set at different angles on his elongated skull, reflected the dim light, giving him an ethereal presence. He raised a gnarled hand, and the murmuring of the council fell silent. "Bring forth the scrolls," Vextar commanded, his voice a low rumble that seemed to emanate from the stone itself. From the shadows stepped lorekeeper Gira, a slight figure whose skin bore the pale translucence of those who spent lifetimes in the dark. She cradled a scroll in her slender hands, the parchment aged and frayed, its surface threaded with veins of gold. As she unfurled it, the air grew colder, and the soft light dimmed further. "The Elder Scrolls of the Exwantheri," Gira intoned, her voice a whisper that echoed unnaturally. "A record of their final days, before their empire turned to ash." The holographic display sprang to life, casting twisted shadows across the chamber. Images of Exwantheri cities, once resplendent with crystalline towers and luminescent skies, flickered. They showed only ruins, overgrown with darkness, where shadows moved without light. "Humans," she continued, "were named the Untamed." The Exwantheri recorded their encounters with these beings. They described them not as conquerors or invaders, but as wildcards, creatures who could not be predicted or controlled. It is said they broke the rules of reality, bending fate itself to their will. A murmur swept through the council. Elders shifted in their seats, their many limbs tapping against the stone with growing unease. The Exwantheri were not the first empire to disappear after encountering humans. The Thal'kor, the Lunari Collective, and even the enigmatic Sharin had all vanished, leaving behind only fragmented records and ghost stories. But not all were convinced. Scout Commander Gilinar stood, his exoskeleton reflecting the dim light, his posture defiant. "Legends and myths," he scoffed. The Exwantheri fell to internal strife. The Thal'kor were destroyed by a supernova, and the Sharin were nothing more than whispers in the void. To attribute their demise to a primitive species is an insult to our intelligence. Gira's eyes narrowed, a ripple of irritation passing over her otherwise serene face. And yet, all records indicate humanity as the last known contact of these civilizations. Coincidence? Or a pattern? Gilinar's mandibles clicked. "We have scanned their world. They possess no spacefaring technology, no planetary defenses. They struggle with their own ecosystems, their politics are fractured, and their knowledge of the cosmos is laughable. The Thal'kor have conquered worlds whose inhabitants could reshape matter and manipulate gravity. What threat could humans possibly pose?" Vextar raised his hand once more, silencing the brewing argument. "Legends or not, the council must act. If there is even a fragment of truth to these tales, we must know. I propose we send a scouting mission. Nothing overt, merely observation. We will judge humanity with our own eyes." Gira bowed, her expression unreadable. "Then let it be so. But heed this, the Exwantheri spoke of the humans not as aggressors, but as forces of change. Where they tread, reality bends. The wild is not dangerous because it is malicious, but because it is untamed. Do not mistake complacency for safety." Gilinar smirked, a ripple of arrogance across his sharp features. "I will return with proof of their primitiveness, and we shall lay to rest these superstitions once and for all." The council adjourned, the shadows swallowing the elders as they dispersed. Gira remained, her fingers brushing the scroll's surface. The golden veins pulsed beneath her touch, as if alive. She closed her eyes and saw visions. Earth, bathed in light, its surface shifting with dreams and nightmares, its people moving like echoes through time. She saw worlds burning, not by human hands, but by their mere presence, as if reality itself restructured around them. "Be careful, Jilinar," she whispered into the dark, "for the wild does not warn before it devours." The Thal'kor stealth ship, a sleek construct of black metal and shifting light, hovered in low Earth orbit, hidden beneath a shroud of adaptive camouflage. Its surface mirrored the starry expanse behind it, rendering it invisible to Earth's primitive sensors. From this vantage point, the Thal'kor could observe the blue planet without interference, their instruments drinking in terabytes of data every second. Scout Commander Jilinar stood on the ship's observation deck, surrounded by holographic displays. Each screen showed live feeds from the scouts embedded across Earth's major cities: New York, London, Tokyo, Cairo, and Sao Paulo. The Thal'kor agents moved among humans, their holographic disguises blending them seamlessly into the masses. They appeared as businessmen, students, tourists, and locals, their alien forms hidden beneath layers of illusion. "Report," Jilinar commanded, his voice echoing through the ship's neural comms. One of the screens shifted, displaying Scout Urel in a busy New York cafe. She wore the guise of a young woman, her movements graceful and precise as she navigated the human environment. "Humans appear chaotic, Commander," she reported. "Their social structures are loosely organized. Much of their communication involves emotional expression rather than information exchange." Another screen flickered to life, showing Scout Varn in a corporate office in Tokyo. He wore a business suit, his alien mind struggling to understand the nuance of human interactions. "Their workplaces are rife with inefficiency," he said, a hint of disdain in his voice. "They delegate tasks through verbal agreements and written documents. Their technology, while adequate, lacks the precision of Thal'kor constructs." Jilinar nodded, his mandibles clicking softly. "And their defensive capabilities? Minimal," reported Scout Lyra, who walked through the crowded markets of Cairo. "Their military presence is fragmented, and most of their security measures are designed to manage their own kind, not to defend against extraterrestrial threats. Their police forces carry ballistic weapons, and their surveillance systems are easily bypassed." On the surface, the Thal'kor scouts moved like shadows, recording every interaction, every conversation, and every behavior. They noted the patterns of human life, the rush of morning commutes, the quiet of evening routines, the unpredictability of social dynamics. To the Thal'kor, it seemed as if humanity operated on instinct, driven by emotion rather than logic. However, as the days turned to weeks, the scouts began to notice anomalies. In London, Scout Bryn witnessed a traffic accident. A bus collided with a pedestrian, the impact throwing the man against a stone wall. By all rights, the human should have perished, his body shattered by the force. But as the crowd gathered, the man stood, dusted off his clothes, and walked away, his expression dazed but his body unbroken. When the scout sensors analyzed the man, they detected rapid cellular regeneration, but the biological process defied known science. In Tokyo, a child approached Scout Varn on the subway. The girl, no more than 6 years old, looked up at him with eyes too old for her youthful face. "Your name is Varn," she said, her voice soft but clear. "You shouldn't stay here. The storm is coming." Before Varn could respond, the train lights flickered and the carriage shook. An earthquake, minor but unexpected. When he looked back, the child was gone, but her words lingered, echoing in his mind. In Cairo, Scout Lyra attended a local clinic, observing the human approach to medicine. She watched as an elderly woman, her skin pale and breath shallow, lay on a hospital bed. The doctors had given up, their technology unable to reverse her condition. But as Lyra observed, a group of women gathered, holding hands around the bed. They sang softly, a melody that seemed to resonate with the air itself. The scanners picked up no technological interference, yet the elderly woman sat up, her eyes bright, her vital signs returning to normal. The Thal'kor detected no known technology, only an energy signature that pulsed in rhythm with the human voices. Back on the stealth ship, the data flowed into the mainframe and patterns emerged. Incidents of survival, unexplained phenomena, and unrecorded abilities. Children with knowledge of future events, adults defying death, and the elderly recovering with no logical explanation. "Commander," Scout Urel said, her voice laced with uncertainty, "these incidents, they do not align with known physics. Are we certain humans are as primitive as we believed?" Gillinear frowned, his confidence wavering. "Statistical outliers," he insisted. "Every species has exceptions. The Xyantheri myths were exaggerations. The humans may possess latent traits, but nothing that could threaten the Thal'kor." "Then how do we explain this?" Lyra asked, displaying a video feed. It showed a crowd during a protest in Sao Paulo. As police advanced with riot shields, a single woman raised her hand. The air shimmered, and the officers halted, their movements slowing, as if time itself had thickened. The crowd moved freely, passing through the frozen officers, their expressions unreadable. When the woman lowered her hand, time resumed, and the officers continued as if nothing had happened. Silence fell over the bridge. Even the ship systems seemed to pause, the lights dimming as if waiting. Gillinear's mandibles tightened, his pride battling his fear. "Prepare for Phase 2, he ordered. "We will provoke them. If there is truth to these abilities, we must force them to reveal it. We need proof, and if they are dangerous, we will neutralize the threat." The scouts received their orders, their holographic disguises flickering, their expressions turning cold. As they descended back to Earth, the shadows of the ship wrapped around them, and the observation shifted to engagement. The Thal'kor had come to study, but they were about to discover that some mysteries were better left untouched. The Thal'kor scouts moved through Earth's bustling cities with newfound purpose. Their initial objective had been observation, but now their mission had evolved into provocation. They needed answers, proof of humanity's hidden potential, if it existed at all. If the rumors of humans bending reality were true, then the Thal'kor had to see it firsthand, no matter the cost. Scout Commander Gillinear coordinated the operation from the stealth ship in orbit. His holographic displays flickered with real-time feeds from his agents on the ground. Each scout was positioned in a major city, ready to initiate controlled experiments designed to push humans to their limits. In New York, Scout Urel, still wearing the guise of a young woman, stood in the middle of a crowded subway platform. Her target, a middle-aged man, an accountant based on the fabricated records the Thal'kor had accessed. He appeared entirely ordinary, disheveled suit, tired eyes, briefcase clutched tightly against his chest. Urel activated a disruption device, a small, invisible orb that emitted low-frequency vibrations designed to induce panic and aggression in nearby humans. The crowd around her began to shift, voices raised, shoulders bumped, and eyes narrowed. The accountant looked around, his brow furrowing as the tension escalated. A shove turned into a shout into a scuffle, and soon, the platform was a maelstrom of pushing bodies and flying fists. But the accountant remained still, his eyes closed, his breathing slow. The crowd parted around him, their anger dissipating as they neared. The commotion died as quickly as it had begun, leaving the subway platform silent, with dozens of confused commuters staring at each other, as if waking from a dream. The accountant opened his eyes, and for a brief moment, Urel's disguise flickered, showing her true form in the reflection of a glass pane. His gaze locked onto her, and he smiled, a knowing expression that sent a chill through her alien bones. "Nice try," he said, his voice carrying despite the stillness of the station. Before she could react, the subway train arrived, and he disappeared into the crowd, leaving her with a feeling she had never experienced before: fear. In London, Scout Varn targeted a school. His goal was to test children, whom he believed to be mentally pliable and easier to manipulate. He introduced a neural disruptor into the school's ventilation system, a device that emitted subliminal signals designed to induce fear-based hallucinations. The children would see shadows where none existed, hear voices that whispered their deepest fears. As the device activated, the children did react. Some gasped, a few cried, but most simply looked around with curiosity. One little boy, with dark curls and bright green eyes, walked up to Varn, whose disguise made him appear as a school custodian. "Mr. the boy said, his voice steady. "Your machine is broken." Varn felt his cloaking device pulse, a wave of static washing over him. "What do you mean, child?" The boy tilted his head, his expression ancient and calm. "You're trying to scare us, but we aren't afraid. You shouldn't be here. The teachers are coming." As if on cue, the classroom door opened, and a teacher stepped in, her face expressionless. But Varn's sensors flared. The energy signature around her was wrong, too perfectly human, like a mask worn too tightly. He tried to move, but his limbs felt heavy, his vision narrowing. The children stared at him, their eyes unblinking, their shadows stretching along the walls, curling into unnatural shapes. In Tokyo, Scout Lyra attempted a more subtle approach. She infiltrated a corporate office, intending to seed misinformation that would incite chaos in the financial markets. She manipulated emails, altered spreadsheets, and planted false data that would lead to disastrous decisions once the stock market opened. However, as she moved through the office, the employees seemed oblivious to her sabotage. They continued their tasks, their expressions neutral, their movements synchronized. When she returned to the server room, all of her changes had been reverted, the systems pristine, as if she had never been there. Her sensors detected a feedback loop, an echo in the system. The security footage showed her entering the room, but then repeating the same actions again and again for hours. She saw herself on the screen, trapped in a loop, typing the same commands, smiling at nothing. She turned to leave, but the door was gone, replaced by a smooth wall, the lights dimming as the room shrank around her. Back on the stealth ship, Commander Gilinar watched the feeds, his mandibles twitching with disbelief. "What is happening?" he demanded. "Report now." But his scouts did not respond. Their video feeds had become static, their biometric data flatlined. On the screens, he saw flickers of movement, shadows walking through the streets, children staring into cameras, ordinary humans whose reflections moved independently of their bodies. The Thal'kor ship's sensors blared a warning. Anomalous energy detected. Gravitational distortion increasing. Reality integrity compromised. Gilinar's claws dug into the console, his breathing shallow. "Prepare emergency protocols," he ordered. "We need to extract our scouts and leave orbit immediately." But as his crew moved, their forms shimmered, faces shifting between Thal'kor and human. The lights on the ship dimmed, the holographic displays showing not the cities of Earth, but reflections of the bridge itself, as if the ship were turning inward, swallowing its own reality. And then, a voice, not over comms, but inside his mind. A child's voice, soft and sing-song, repeating a nursery rhyme he had never heard, yet knew all too well. "If you see them, close your eyes. If you hear them, cover your ears. If they call your name, run. But if they smile, it is already too late." Gilinar felt something cold brush his shoulder, and when he turned, the bridge was empty, save for shadows that moved like smoke, their forms almost human, but not quite right. The reality around him wavered, and he understood, with a clarity that cut through his fear, that they had not trapped the humans. The humans had trapped them, and now there was no way out. The Thal'kor scouts were no longer just observers. They were captives within a world that defied all understanding. The simple act of stepping onto Earth had become a descent into a labyrinth where the rules of reality seemed malleable, reshaped by an unseen hand. The humans, whom they had believed to be primitive and vulnerable, now appeared to hold the threads of existence itself, twisting them into incomprehensible patterns. Commander Gilinar sat rigidly on the bridge of the Thal'kor stealth ship, his many eyes fixed on the holographic displays. The screens flickered between static and nightmarish visions, streets filled with faceless humans, buildings melting into the sky, and shadows that danced against the light. His scouts' feeds had become a cacophony of whispers, their biometric data displaying impossible readings. Heart rates slowed to nothing, brainwaves oscillated in patterns unknown to Thal'kor science. "Systems check," Gilinar ordered, his voice trembling. The ship's AI, once a calm and precise voice, now responded with a fragmented lullaby, the words looping over and over, growing softer until only silence remained. On the surface, Scout Yrel found herself trapped in the New York subway station. The crowd that had once been humans now stood motionless, their bodies gray and featureless, like statues carved from ash. She moved through them, her disguise faltering, the holographic skin peeling away, revealing her true alien form. But the figures did not react. Their heads turned in unison, their eyes hollow, mouths opening, but no sound emerged. She backed against a pillar, her breathing rapid, her visor displaying error messages in a spiral of alien script. "Commander," she whispered, her voice a thin thread in the overwhelming quiet, "I need extraction. The humans are not human." Her comms remained silent. She pulled out a beacon, a last resort device meant to break through any interference. But when she activated it, the light pulsed red, and the shadows around her deepened. The statue-like figures began to move, their bodies cracking, ash falling away, revealing flesh that shifted and rippled, as if their bones and muscles were liquid beneath the skin. One figure reached out, its hand elongating, fingers stretching far too long, the tips brushing against her helmet. The screen fogged, and shapes moved within the glass, faces pressed against the inside, eyes wide and mouths silently screaming. Yrel felt a pressure in her mind, a weight that pushed against her thoughts, fracturing them into shards. She closed her eyes, but the darkness offered no escape. The whispers grew, chanting in a language she did not know, but understood all the same. The world folded around her, and when she opened her eyes, she was no longer in New York, but in a white room, featureless, endless, with only her reflection staring back. Human, terrified, and trapped. In London, Scout Varn wandered through school halls that seemed to stretch on forever. The walls breathed, the paint peeling away to reveal veins and tissue beneath. His steps echoed, but they were not his own. Another set of footsteps, just behind him, always out of sync. He turned corners, but each corridor led back to the same classroom, where children sat with eyes too bright, smiling at nothing. He approached the board, where words wrote themselves, chalk moving on its own, spelling out his name, his birth cycle, his deepest fears. The teacher, who had been human, now stood with her back too straight, her neck bending slowly, her head turning all the way around without the rest of her body moving. "Welcome, Varn," she said, her voice layered, as if multiple mouths spoke through her. "Have you finished your homework?" The children giggled, their voices hollow, and Varn felt the world shift. His armor tightened, his body felt small, his hands soft and uncalloused. He was seated among the children, a book in front of him, its pages blank, but whispers emerged from between the lines, coiling around his thoughts, until he forgot who he was. On the ship, Gillenar's situation deteriorated. The bridge crew sat at their stations, but their movements were wrong, mechanical, their heads twitching, their fingers typing, but no screens responded. He approached Tactical Officer Lindar, whose eyes were wide open, but the pupils were gone, leaving only white orbs. Her mouth moved, but her voice came through the ship's speakers, an echo of Gillenar's own words, spoken hours ago. "Systems check. Systems check. Systems check." He backed away, his shadow peeling off the floor, standing beside him, mirroring his every movement, but with a grin too wide, teeth too sharp. The ship's AI spoke again, but now it used a child's voice, soft and melodic. "Would you like to play a game, Gillenar? You've been watching us for so long. Isn't it our turn now?" He turned to the viewport, where the earth spun, its clouds swirling, but the blue of the oceans had darkened, the continents shifting, the coastlines crawling as if the planet breathed. The stars beyond had become eyes, blinking in unison, and shadows moved across the surface, dancing in patterns he could not understand. Gillenar tried to activate the escape protocol, but the console rejected his commands. Each button he pressed only triggered laughter, the sound of children playing, echoing through the ship. He slumped to the floor, his body heavy, his mind unraveling, and as the lights dimmed, the shadows embraced him, their cold fingers brushing against his skin. He heard the voice once more, but this time, it was his own, a whisper among many, lost in the chorus. You should not have come. You are part of the story now. And stories never truly end. And as the ship drifted, its engines silent, the shadows settled, and Earth remained as it always had. A world of mystery, where reality was not a constant, but a suggestion, and those who tried to conquer it became characters in a tale they could not escape. The Thal'kor scouts had stepped into a nightmare, but it was only now that they began to understand the true depth of their predicament. What had started as a simple reconnaissance mission had devolved into a psychological trap, one that Earth had set without lifting a finger. The planet itself seemed to be a living entity, a storyteller that pulled at the threads of reality, weaving new narratives around its uninvited guests. On the stealth ship in orbit, Commander Thal'kor paced the bridge, his many eyes darting to the flickering screens. His crew sat at their stations, but their movements had become mechanical, their fingers tapping on consoles that no longer responded. The ship's systems were glitching screens displayed not data, but distorted images of the crew's own faces, stretched into unsettling smiles, eyes wide and vacant. Initiate emergency protocols, Thal'kor ordered, but his voice echoed back to him, layered with whispers. His command console displayed an error message, reality integrity compromised. He turned to Tactical Officer Thal'kor, whose form sat rigidly in her chair. Thal'kor, respond. She did not move. Her head was slightly tilted, her eyes open but devoid of recognition. When Thal'kor approached, he saw that her visor displayed a reflection of the bridge, but in that mirrored world, Thal'kor was moving, her mouth speaking, her hands working the controls. The reflected crew behind her also moved, but their eyes remained locked onto Thal'kor, as if the glass itself watched him. He reached out, and the reflection shattered, the screen cracking, blood seeping from the edges, as if the glass were flesh. Thal'kor recoiled, his breath hitching, his mandibles clattering with fear. On the surface, Scout Urel wandered the subway tunnels of New York, though the world around her had changed. The tiles on the walls pulsed like living tissue, and the subway tracks stretched into an endless abyss. Her holographic disguise had failed, her true alien form exposed, but the figures around her did not react. They stood motionless, their skin pale, their faces blank. She tried to contact the ship, but her comms device hummed with static, the white noise shifting into soft voices, children singing a nursery rhyme in reverse. She moved through the crowd, her steps echoing, but the figures parted silently, their heads turning to follow her movement. At the end of the platform, a man stood, his back to her. His silhouette was human, but his shadow stretched, the darkness twisting into tendrils that wrapped around the lights, dimming them. Hello! Urel's voice was small, the confidence drained from her. I need assistance. Please. The man turned, his face identical to her own. His lips moved, but the words came from everywhere and nowhere. You are not supposed to be here. Her sensors flared, detecting energy signatures that made no sense, readings that fluctuated wildly, displaying biological data of creatures both alive and dead. She backed away, but the floor dissolved, and she fell, not through space, but through memories. She saw her own birth, her training, her life among the Thal'kor, but the faces of her kin were blurred, their voices replaced by human whispers. In London, Scout Varn had become lost in the school, though lost did not fully capture his predicament. The hallways stretched, each door opened to the same room, a classroom filled with children whose faces were masks, their eyes holes that led into infinite dark. He found himself sitting at a desk, a pencil in his hand, the paper before him blank except for the word Varn repeated thousands of times. The teacher stood at the front of the room, her face constantly shifting, morphing between human and Thal'kor, and something else entirely. A shadow with too many eyes, a smile that curved all the way around its head. Varn, she said, her voice a chorus. What is the answer to the question? He looked down, and his paper bled, the ink seeping into his fingers, his hands turning transparent, his veins exposed, pulsing with light instead of blood. "I don't know," he whispered. The children laughed, their voices sharp, and the walls closed in, the ceiling lowering, the world shrinking until he was nothing more than a figure in a snow globe, the teacher's hand holding it, her eyes watching him, a child studying an insect. Back on the ship, Gyllenhaar felt the bridge tilt, the gravity shifting, as if the vessel hung on the edge of a precipice. His crew remained frozen, their forms dissolving, skin flaking away, revealing voids beneath, black holes where their bodies had been. He approached the viewport, where Earth hung against the stars, but the planet's surface swirled, the oceans black, the continents morphing, faces forming in the clouds, eyes blinking open in the forests. A figure appeared behind him in the glass. A child, her reflection solid, though the bridge remained empty. She tilted her head, her eyes too wide, her smile too still. "Do you understand now?" she asked, her voice filling the room, the ship, the universe. "You came to watch us, but we were always watching you." Gyllenhaar felt the floor give way, the bridge melting, the stars folding inward, and he understood, finally, what the X-Wen theory had meant. Humans were not just dangerous because of their potential, but because they were gatekeepers of reality, wildcards in the deck of the universe, capable of reshaping the story simply by being part of it. And now he was part of it too, a character in a story that never ended, a shadow among shadows, a voice that whispered in the dark, lost but never truly gone. The stealth ship drifted, its systems offline, its crew nothing more than echoes, and Earth remained as it always had, quiet, unassuming, a blue dot in the cosmos, where reality itself was a dream, and those who sought to conquer it became stories woven into the fabric of its defense. The Thal'kor ship hung in orbit like a fly caught in a web. To the rest of the galaxy, it was invisible, a shadow among stars, but to Earth, it was a trapped insect, struggling against silken threads that tightened with every movement. What the Thal'kor had mistaken for a simple reconnaissance mission had become an exercise in futility. There was no extraction, no escape, only the slow, inevitable unraveling of reality around them. On the bridge, Commander Gyllenhaar activated the emergency protocols, his claws tapping at the console. The screens blinked with distorted imagery, fractured reflections of the bridge, hallways looping into themselves, and the crew members frozen in their seats, their eyes empty. The ship's AI, once a calm voice of guidance, now muttered nursery rhymes in a childlike tone, each line dripping with a sense of doom. "Initiate manual override," Gyllenhaar barked, his voice wavering. "Prepare for immediate departure. Get us out of orbit now." But the ship did not respond. Instead, the stars outside the viewport shifted, as if the planet below were rotating the cosmos. The Earth's surface twisted, the clouds forming spirals, the continents shifting, as if the world itself were a living, breathing thing. "Commander, look!" One of the few remaining crew members, Ensign Thal'kor, pointed at the viewport, his hand trembling. The planet's oceans turned black, their waves forming faces, eyes opening beneath the surface, watching the ship. The continents pulsed, the mountain ranges shifting, valleys deepening, the forests forming symbols that seemed to speak directly to their minds. "We are not moving," Gyllenhaar realized, his mandibles clattering. "It is the universe around us that is changing." On the surface, Scout Uriel had stumbled into a nightmare version of New York. The streets were empty, the buildings warped, their windows like eyes, their doors like gaping mouths. Her communication device was dead, her sensors overwhelmed by a constant hum, a vibration that seemed to emanate from the very ground. She ran, her alien form exposed, the holographic disguise failing. The city twisted around her, the streets bending, lamp posts reaching out, their metal limbs grasping, their shadows slithering over the pavement. She turned a corner and found herself back at the same intersection, the same faceless crowd, their eyes holes of darkness, their mouths open but silent. "Commander," Do you read me? She screamed into the comms, but only laughter answered. A child's giggle, soft and persistent, echoing off the walls. In London, Scout Varn wandered through endless corridors. The school building had become a maze. Each door opened into the same room, where children sat, their heads slowly turning, their necks stretching, their eyes unblinking. He found himself back at a desk, a notebook in front of him, the pages blank except for the words, "You are not real," scrawled over and over in red ink. His hands moved on their own, his fingers writing, even as his mind screamed to stop. "Varn," the teacher said, her face too smooth, her mouth moving, but the words came through the notebook, ink bleeding into sentences. "Have you finished your assignment?" He looked around, but the other children's faces had flattened, their features smooth, their shadows moving independently, dancing along the walls. Back on the stealth ship, Gyllenhaal activated the warp drive, but the engines only groaned, the metal buckling, as if the ship itself resisted him. The emergency lights flickered, casting long shadows, but these shadows moved, slithering over the consoles, reaching for the crew. One by one, his officers slumped in their seats, their bodies going limp, their shadows standing, peeling away from the floor, taking form, their outlines human, their eyes white voids. "Prepare for manual evacuation," Gyllenhaal ordered, but his voice came out wrong, delayed, as if he were hearing himself speak seconds after his mouth moved. His reflection in the console screen did not mimic his actions, its eyes blinking out of sync, its mouth curling into a smile that he did not feel. The ship's AI hummed a lullaby, and the words on the screens began to rearrange themselves, spelling out sentences in human language. "You are here. You are home. You will never leave." He turned to the viewport, where the Earth had grown, its surface filling the sky, the clouds forming spirals, pulling the ship down, not with gravity, but with intent. The planet's face shifted, continents forming eyes, oceans becoming a mouth, and Gyllenhaal understood. Earth was not a planet. It was a consciousness, a dreamer, and the Thal'kor had wandered into its sleep. They were now characters in a story, playthings in a reality that could reshape itself at will. His vision darkened, the ship's lights died, and he felt the cold fingers of shadows brush over him. His body felt light, his thoughts slipping away, and as he collapsed, he heard the voice of a child, soft and gentle, as if lulling him to sleep. "Good night, little shadow. Welcome to the dream." And as the Thal'kor ship drifted, its engines silent, its crew reduced to whispers, the Earth turned, its face serene, a blue marble in the void, holding its secrets beneath layers of time and space, a world that did not just defend itself, but absorbed all who threatened it, turning invaders into stories, memories into myths, and reality into a dream. The Thal'kor ship was no longer a vessel of conquest but a tomb adrift in orbit. Its hull, once sleek and unyielding, had become warped and twisted, as if reality itself had taken a breath and exhaled something new. The metal seemed to flow like liquid, forming shapes that resembled human faces, their mouths open in silent screams. The ship's lights pulsed rhythmically, matching the heartbeat of the planet below, a subtle reminder that Earth had become the master of their fate. Commander Gyllenhaal sat at the center of the bridge, his body slumped in the command chair. His once proud exoskeleton had lost its sheen, the chitin dull and cracked. His many eyes were open, but they no longer saw the screens or the fractured remnants of his crew. Instead, he stared into a vision only he could see, a world where shadows moved with purpose and whispers filled the void. Around him, the bridge crew remained seated, their hands still on controls, but their flesh had fused with the ship's consoles, their limbs stretched into wires and metal, their faces frozen in expressions of fear and acceptance. They had become part of the vessel, a crew eternally bound to a ship that was no longer theirs. "Commander?" A voice echoed, but not from the comms. It came from everywhere, vibrating through the metal and air. A child's voice, soft and sing-song. "Are you ready to wake up?" Gyllenhaal tried to respond, but his mandibles clicked uselessly, his tongue heavy. His mind spun, memories folding over memories, as if his life were being rewritten, each chapter shorter, each moment slipping away. He saw images, the Thal'kor homeworld, its crimson skies and towering spires. He saw his family, his ascension to commander, the victories over countless worlds. But each memory unraveled, the faces of his kin blurred, the landscapes shifting, until he saw only earth, green and blue, its clouds swirling, its surface an ever-changing canvas. On the surface, Scout Urel found herself standing in Times Square. But the city was wrong. The billboards displayed images of her own face, but with human features, eyes too large, smiles too wide. The crowd moved around her, their footsteps silent, their bodies casting no shadows. She tried to run, but her feet sank into the pavement, which had become soft and yielding, like clay. She looked down, and hands emerged, fingers curling around her ankles, pulling her down. The world bent, the buildings curving inward, the sky folding into ribbons, and as she was drawn into the earth, she heard the laughter of children, their voices overlapping, a chorus of playtime and nightmares. In London, Scout Varn stood in the schoolroom, his body reduced to a silhouette, his form translucent, as if he were a ghost. The teacher stood before him, her shadow stretching across the walls, her eyes pools of darkness. "Varn," she said, and the name echoed, each syllable peeling away a layer of his identity. "You have learned your lesson, haven't you?" He nodded, though he did not know why. His thoughts were not his own, his memories rewritten, each one a scene from a story he did not recognize. He saw himself as a child, a student, an ordinary human boy, sitting in a classroom, learning lessons about the cosmos, about Earth, about the stories of those who came and never left. And when he looked down, his hands were human, his reflection in the glass a stranger's face, and the teacher's smile grew, her teeth too sharp, her shadow swallowing the room, until nothing remained. Back on the ship, Gilinar's body trembled, his limbs moving slowly, as if through thick liquid. He reached for the console, his fingers passing through it, the metal rippling, as if the entire ship were a mirage. The viewport displayed Earth, but the planet's surface pulsed, faces forming in the clouds, eyes opening in the forests, mouths whispering from the waves. "Are you ready to join us?" the voice asked, and he saw a child standing at the center of the bridge, her form solid while everything else warped around her. I don't understand," he managed, his voice small, cracked. The child approached, her steps slow, her eyes unblinking. "You came to conquer, but Earth does not fall. Those who try become part of the story, woven into the dream. You are not the first, and you will not be the last." She reached out, and when her hand touched his chest, he felt reality unravel. His body dissolved, his mind stretched, and he became a thread in a tapestry. His thoughts a ripple in a pond, his existence reduced to a whisper among many. The stealth ship remained, its systems dark, its hull fused with shadows, a drifting monument to the Thal'kor Arrogance. To the rest of the galaxy it was invisible, a ghost ship, its signals lost, its crew vanished. On Earth, the cities thrived, the humans moved through their lives, unaware of the battle that had been fought and lost. The planet breathed, its storyteller spirit settled, its dreams weaving new tales, always ready for the next visitors, the next challengers, the next characters to be absorbed. And in the quiet corners of the world, in the rustling of leaves, in the whisper of wind, in the soft hum of static, the voices of the Thal'kor remained. Not as aliens, but as echoes, their words part of the narrative, their existence now a story that children might tell, a fairy tale of those who came to conquer, but found only the dream and lost themselves within it.